Hi guys, what's going on? And welcome back to an episode of Conqueror's Blade. So today, Selemchid Cavalry. I have been putting off this video for such a long time for no particularly good reason. I don't know, but it's been ages ago since they modified this unit and added the Wedge and gave them a little bit of a small buff with it, and I really wanted to come back and revisit them. And yeah, I've been meaning to do this for quite a few months now. I've had some footage sorted and everything, but for some reason, largely because Season 3 happened, and then kind of along with that we had some of the cavalry changes, and then I wanted to retest them to see if the cavalry, the general cavalry nerf we had in Season 3 was going to kind of affect the unit as a whole, and it largely hasn't, so here we are. So what's the unit like? Well, if you saw my original video back at the start of the Season 2, I liked them. I thought they were a decent unit, but the one area I really felt they were lacking was in terms of their formations, because all they had was this really large dispersed formation, which was useless in any sort of street or any sort of confined space. Then they had this line formation, but it was a really, really long line, which was pretty useless in any sort of siege map because it was just too wide. But you could directly sort of invert the line to form it into sort of a very long thin column, I suppose, which sort of worked, but it was a bit clunky and it wasn't very nice to do. But before Season 3, they got a buff and they added in a wedge, and the unit really, really needed a wedge, and that's what I said in my last video at the end of Season 2. God, this unit would really benefit from a wedge, and here we are now with a wedge. So this has made things quite a lot better. On top of that, I've actually finished out just deleting them. They max out at level 15, so they're not a too bad a one to get leveled up, and obviously to get them up to elite, it's not too hard to do. They get a few nice little bonuses, quite a little bit of charge damage increase as you head down the line. A little bit of cooldown. It's one thing that's really nice about these times. It doesn't actually tell you on here, but the cooldown is really, really quite low. It's something like 25 seconds or less. You know, after you've been playing with monastics or something with a 60-second cooldown, being able to get stuck into these guys with their much reduced charge cooldown is actually really quite pleasant. And that final one is also quite nice. That extra 15 damage dealt to infantry makes them really quite nice in like little siege environments in those little confined spaces. So we'll hop into some gameplay shortly. Probably not going to be a super long video because cavalry videos tend not to be as long, because these guys tend not to live very long, because when you dive into the stats, particularly the defensive attributes, you'll kind of see why they don't live very long. With only 6,300 health and 230 piercing defense, as you can imagine, range damage stacks up pretty quickly with these guys. So yeah, they tend to be, you've got your charge, unless you are charging against sort of a singular unit in isolation, and you can charge and kill the unit, and then you can sort of regroup and focus on the second one. Then if you charge into any sort of significant amount of enemies, yes, you'll get a good number of kills so long as you get a clean charge, but you'll die because there'll just be enough stuff that hits you and you don't have enough armor and health to survive. So they tend to be a little bit of that one-hit wonder, but for 170 leadership, they are quite nice, and they're pretty good for clearing points, for getting that damage charge out when you need it, and are not as expensive as something like monastics, etc. And particularly kind of with the nerfs that cavalry has seen in Season 3, then the fact that these guys haven't really been affected all that much, they've always been very fast and very weak, and the fact that their charge is still very damaging kind of makes them one of my preferred cavalry units at the moment. Anyway, let's just hop into a few clips now, take a little bit of a look at some of these guys in action, and kind of see how we've been getting on. Perhaps one of the problems I do have with the unit, and this is perhaps less on the unit and more on my own playstyle, is the fact it does tend to make me pretty rash, and I tend to end up getting myself and the unit killed pretty quickly. So in this situation, for example, I get in, get the charge, actually do a reasonable number of kills, help sort of assist the A point, and then I sort of charge in myself, and yeah, cutting up myself killed pretty easily. Although it's nice to see that the cavalry is still, you know, laying about itself and getting itself some kills, so it doesn't do too badly. But that's something that I tend to do pretty over and over with these guys, is just sort of suicide charge them. I very rarely do I actually find situations where I get a charge, I kill a unit, and the unit then, you know, survives for another go. It tends to be a bit of a one-hit wonder, and I'm trying to get enough kills to justify the unit in its charge, because then it's dead. Very occasionally you get to pull a few of the unit out, you know, maybe 5 will survive or something like that, but generally, you know, I find it tends to be a bit of a suicide when you're using them. But they are still pretty nice, and the charge damage really is quite good. I think particularly now that we've got this wedge, it makes it much easier in situations like this. For example, I can get a lot of the unit through the gateway in a way that I just couldn't before. I can stack up unit kills, hero kills, because the damage they do is quite high. They can get things like that quite easily. A lot easier now they've got that wedge, because the formation is just so much more practical than the enormous dispersed formation we used to have before the buff. You do occasionally get some nice situations, where you find a unit of archers on its own like that, something like that, and you can get in amongst them. They do pretty reasonable hand-to-hand damage, but while the unit still does stack up its own damage pretty quickly, kind of as you see. And sometimes, even attacking a unit of range like this, it pretty much cost me the unit. A few of them managed to get out, maybe about half, but I think we even lose one or two more as they try and run away. So, yeah, casualties start to rack up on the unit pretty quickly. But that's not to underestimate its damage potential. If you can get the right sort of situation, get the right sort of charge with that wedge, then you can really do quite a lot of damage against high tier units. For example, this unit of Reapers here in this narrow little corridor, slightly balk up the charge, but still it goes through, it kills all the enemy heroes, and it completely wipes that unit of enemy Reapers. That's a 350 leadership unit eliminated. So they can be well worth bringing to battles. And when you need that charge and you need that pressure on a point, these guys are pretty decent at doing it. And considering the massive nerf we had to tier 5 cavalry over the sort of start of Season 3, I think that really puts these as sort of a unit to go to the forefront, because they really start to excel a lot more now. Anyway, it's just going to be a short video today, just to have a bit of a look at them. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you have, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you use these guys, or do you have another sort of low tier cavalry that you prefer? So yeah, do let me know in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel for loads more Conqueror's Blade content, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.